Welcome back, Unexplained Ones, to All Things Unexplained, where the unknown meets the undeniable. I'm Dr. Mounce, and what you are about to hear is part 1 of the May 1st, 2025 UAP Disclosure Fund Congressional Briefing, a groundbreaking event that we live streamed live on our Twitter at ATUnexplained and our YouTube channel at youtube.com/at allthingsunexplained. If you'd like to watch the full video, you can find the direct link to the live stream in the show description, and for your convenience, chapter markers have been added to this episode so you can easily navigate through the hearing. Now, a quick word on the UAPDF, the UAP Disclosure Fund. You can learn more about their mission at uapdisclosurefund.org. This organization is dedicated to promoting full transparency and accountability regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena, bringing together experts from science, defense, and intelligence to advocate for disclosure and public awareness. Part 1 of this congressional briefing was moderated by Lue Elizondo, former director of ATIP, and featured testimony from Dr. Avi Loeb, Harvard astrophysicist and Galileo project lead, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, former U.S. Navy oceanographer and UAP analyst, and Dr. Eric Davis, physicist and advisor known for his work on advanced propulsion and UAP research. They were questioned by UAP-focused members of Congress, Representatives Anna Paulina Luna, Tim Burchett, and Eric Burlison. And yes, this was the same day that Dr. Eric Davis publicly stated that 4-foot-tall gray aliens crashed at Roswell, or more accurately, Corona, New Mexico, in 1947. Later that day on the Joe Rogan podcast, Hal Puthoff talked more about Eric Davis's investigation of the Roswell Incident. Now, despite the rough audio at the hearing, hinted at in that eerie whisper you just heard at the beginning, this briefing is a historic moment, and we're bringing it to you raw and unfiltered. Let's get started.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic threw their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All right, Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounce. Welcome to All Things Unexplained. This is Thursday, May 1st, 2025. I'm going to start the Understanding UAP Science, National Security, and Innovation House Oversight and Accountability hearing from the beginning and just let it roll. So here we go from the beginning. Enjoy.
I'm not sure there's ever been assembled a panel like this in front of the American people. And I don't say that lightly because I've been part of a lot of meetings, a lot of sensitive meetings, both in the intelligence community and within the national security apparatus. We have elements from academia, elements from the scientific community, elements from the national security arena, elements from the intelligence community, all speaking here today to you about what they know regarding the UAP topic. The assembly here is, dare I say, possibly even historic. and I'm truly honored to be with you here today. I will be your moderator. Real quick reminder for our panelists, I'd like to, when you ask a question, try to keep it within 3 minutes, Eric. If you go beyond that, I might have to kind of get the conversation directed to some other questions, because we do have a lot of panelists, and I also have a tendency to talk a lot, so I'm going to try to keep myself in check as well. But panelists, if you can try to keep your responses to 3 minutes. Some panelists have for you a presentation. So for those who have a presentation, we'll do the presentation first, and then we'll be followed up with questions. And of course, esteemed members of Congress, if you have any questions at the time, please feel free to ask them, and we will certainly have our panelists address those questions for you. One more reminder, again, a security reminder. I know I said it before, but for anybody who's coming here after, I'm going to be asking questions. Some of those will be very pointed questions. For those of you who have a security clearance or who have held a security clearance, I ask that you please be mindful that this is an unclassified venue and not to discuss classified information. For the record, none of us look good in an orange jumpsuit. Certainly I don't. So you want to be mindful of that. I'd also like to thank the media. Thank each and every one of you for being here. I know this is a topic that for quite some time was fraught with stigma and taboo. This would have been considered career suicide for any respectable journalist to cover this topic, just like it is for politicians and our elected leaders of this nation. And times are changing. Times are changing because of you. And so I want to do a hearty thank you to the members of media who are covering this. And last but not least, and probably perhaps most important, I would like to thank each and every one of you in the audience. Each and every one of you that's tuning in, each and every one of you that's watching this, each and every one of you that might be sitting on your sofa at home or around a dinner table and are interested in this topic and have asked questions. This is because of you. Our elected officials put this on because of you, not me, and not even our esteemed guests, because of you. And that should tell you something. That means democracy is working, folks. That means transparency is working. That means we, the people, are winning. And that's a lot. That's profound. This is democracy in action, and you're watching it. So I want to thank each and every one of you, and I also want to thank real quick the staff here on Hill that helped put this together and coordinate this. I know it's a bit of a zoo, but thank you so much for being patient with us and helping us with the audio visual and the media and the seating. It is very much appreciated. So with that, let's go ahead and begin, shall we? So I'd like to introduce the first of our panelists. Here is Dr. Avi Loeb. Now bear with me, because he has his academic vitae. It's probably about 10 pages long, so I'm going to just try to truncate it a little bit. So Dr. Avi Loeb is a PhD professor of science at Harvard University. He is also the head of the Galileo Project. He is also the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. He's a contributor to Arrow. He is also a trained astrophysicist. Let's see if we can get this right. Director of the what institute? Director of the Institute for Theory and Computation, and a former member of the President's Council on Science and Technology. So think about that for a minute, right? Advising the president. Former chair of the Board of Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies, and also author of 8 books and over 1,000 scientific papers. And he's here before you today. By the way, none of our panelists are being paid. Everybody's doing this out of their own kindness and goodness of their own heart. The second panelist we have here is Tim Gallaudet. For those of you who served in the Navy know how hard it is to achieve the rank of admiral. That is no easy feat. He's also a former acting administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, aka NOAA. Former oceanographer for the Navy, a advisory board member of the UAPDF, folks here that are helping make this happen. But I'll tell you something else about Tim. Tim also happened to be one of the Navy officers that was present and privy during the Roswell incidences The Roosevelt, the reason why I say plural, because there are many of these UAP incidents that the USS Roosevelt encountered in the 2013-2014 timeframe when she was conducting military operations in the support of the global war on terror. And so Admiral Gallaudet, I would consider indirectly a witness to some degree of some of the dysfunction that the bureaucracy had overlaid on some of our servicemen and women in uniform reporting UAP. And certainly last but not least is Dr. Eric Davis, not only a colleague, but a friend, and in some cases even a mentor. He is a theoretical and applied physicist, senior science advisor at Earthtech, former researcher at the Aerospace Corporation. And now, those are just some of those. Let me tell you who he really is. Dr. Eric Davis was one of our senior scientists during my tenure at ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and OSAT as well. He was one of our chief scientists, and by the way, he was also part of other legacy efforts before that, working with elements of the US government. And I think what you're going to find him have to say today is going to be very, very compelling. He's an honorable man. He has served his country time and time again, in some cases at great personal expense, professionally and personally to himself. And probably one of the smartest individuals I've ever had the honor and privilege to meet in my life and work with. If you get a chance, I'd shake his hand because I would consider him, like the rest of these gentlemen, a national treasure. And I think, like I said, what he's going to tell you today is going to be very interesting. So this is why I do the reminder of 3 minutes, because even myself, I would love to just let him roll for about 3 hours. So with that said, I think we have a presentation we're going to present first by Dr. Avi Loeb. So if we can just give him a quick round of applause.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let us be honest. There are objects in the sky that we don't understand. That's not the first time that we don't understand something. You know, our knowledge, scientific knowledge, is an island in an ocean of ignorance. We don't know what 85% of matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter, but we invest billions of dollars figuring it out over the past half century. We haven't yet figured it out. My point is simple. We should invest $1 billion in figuring out what is in our sky. And that means developing artificial intelligence algorithms, software, that would help us analyze data from state-of-the-art sensors. And in one case, if all of these objects are produced by humans, the Defense Department will have a new tool to monitor what's out there in the sky. It's important for national security. However, if 1 out of 1 million objects came from outside the solar system, the person who finds that object will get the Nobel Prize. It's a win-win situation. We need to invest $1 billion in this task. And I will mention a few details of what we can do with it. This is a subject that the public cares a lot about. And so it's one of the unusual opportunities to invest $1 billion in science and technology that will make all taxpayers happy. If you were to ask them, do they care more about what dark matter is, or whether we have a neighbor that is intelligent from which we can learn, they will tell you it's the second question that they want $1 billion to be spent on. So to make taxpayers happy, let's invest the money. And if we don't find any technological relics from other civilizations, this would be a very precious defense system for our country. So I will show a few slides describing what we have been doing over the past few years in the project that I'm leading at Harvard University, the Galileo project. What you see in the first slide is a title of an article that appeared in New York Times Magazine. And I was not happy with the content. I contacted the editor and said, if this is the way you describe science, how can I believe anything you say about politics?
That's a good take.
We can leave now. You already covered.
Now, Enrico Fermi, in 1950, had lunch at Los Alamos, and in his Italian accent, he asked, "Where is everybody?" And that's a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be presumptuous. Your partner will not come to you. You are not that attractive. You have to go to dating sites. And Enrico Fermi didn't even build a telescope to look out, didn't have cameras to check. And so saying, where is everybody, is arrogant. And many of my colleagues in academia argue extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you read the news, you would conclude that we are not extraordinary, there is room for improvement. And imagining something like us on a planet that has similar conditions to Earth is not an extraordinary claim. It's just an ordinary claim to say under similar circumstances, you will get life and eventually intelligent life. And most stars in the Milky Way galaxy, 100 billion of them, formed billions of years before the sun. So we are late for the party. They may have been before us. So it's an ordinary claim that requires ordinary evidence. When people make this statement, they also imply that we should not invest any funds in searching for them. And without seeking evidence, how can we find them? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my point is that within the scientific community, innovation is suppressed by people who assume the answer in advance. When I was a kid, I was most frustrated by the adults in the room because I would ask them a question and they would pretend to know the answer. And the one reason I became a scientist is because I don't care what other people say. I don't care how many likes I get. I just want to figure out the answer based on evidence. That's the way a detective works. We shouldn't assume anything. But if we don't collect data, we will never find anything new. Now, another important point is new scientific knowledge doesn't fall into our lap. To find the Higgs boson, the CERN invested $10 billion in the Large Hadron Collider. To find the first generation of stars and galaxies in the universe, the scientific version of the story, the biblical story of Genesis, we had to invest $10 billion in the Webb telescope. I was one of the people in the first advisory committee that designed back then the next generation space telescope. My point is, in order to find something new, you need to invest resources, time, and effort. It's a lot of work. You can't just sit on your chair and figure out the answer the way most people do. And just to give you an example, we are familiar with objects that have a positive mass. We are also aware that the universe is not just expanding, but its expansion is accelerating. So we see evidence for negative gravity that is repulsive, pushing the universe apart. And if we have access to a negative mass, just like there are positive and negative electric charges, if we put a negative mass next to a positive mass, the total mass would be zero. This object would float under gravity. And you won't need any fuel to move it around. So when they look at Starship, our best rocket, whoever has an access to a negative mass would laugh at it. We are putting most of the mass in the fuel of the rocket. It's a huge, gigantic thing. And if they had access to a negative mass, that would not be necessary. You would just use the payload plus a negative mass that balances it. Just to give an example of something beyond our knowledge, if negative masses exist or not, we don't know if you can bottle this dark energy that fills up the universe. Thank you. Now, the Galileo project at Harvard University was established a few years ago, and it followed the first report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to Congress. And I suggested also to NASA just around that time that they should look into that. This is a subject where the intelligence agency cannot really make a lot of progress on because the data is limited. So why not build observatories monitoring the sky? The sky is not classified. Astronomers have been looking at the sky for a while. The oceans are not classified. We just need sensors and then analyzing the data with the state-of-the-art AI software. That's all we need. So this was not happening. And I'm not happy with looking at past reports, because when you look at past reports, you have very limited data. And you can't make a lot of progress. If the data is fuzzy, you can't really get it to be crispier. But if you have a working observatory that monitors the sky all the time, all the oceans, and you see something unusual, you can try and collect better data. And therefore, I always say, the best is yet to come. If we were curious enough, and that's what we should be, we can collect data, forget about the hundreds of reports from the past, and have a collection of millions of objects that we look at. That's what the Galileo project is about. And in the future, we can get very good data with equipment that was never tried before, because astronomers usually focus on a small part of the sky and look at things that are far away. They ignore objects flying overhead. And the Galileo project has developed an observatory at Harvard University first that monitors the sky in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. And as of now, we are actually doing triangulation. We have multiple units that look at the same object from different directions so that we can figure out the distance, the velocity, the acceleration of the object. That's extremely important. And we are building additional observatories, one in Pennsylvania, another one in Nevada. Hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have 3 observatories collecting data on a few million objects every year. And I say, even if 1 in a million is of extraterrestrial origin, that would be the biggest discovery that humanity ever made. It would mean that we have a partner. We shouldn't assume anything about the neighbor, but it would be useful to figure out what they are capable of, because we can do better. They're probably more advanced than we are if they reached our backyard before we reached their backyard. So we collected data on many, by now, millions of objects. We analyzed it, and obviously we are happy to share the data with whoever is interested. But also, over the past decade, the first objects from outside the solar system were discovered for the first time by astronomers. There were 3 of them. The first was identified by US government satellites that are monitoring the Earth for any ballistic missiles being launched by adversarial nations. And in 2014, they noticed an object that collided with Earth and exploded with a fireball that released 1% of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. And they decided it's not human-made, and therefore it can be shared with the astronomy community. So NASA published a catalog of all these meteors over the past decade. And one of them was this one. We looked at the catalog and uncovered it and realized that it came from outside the solar system because it was moving very fast. It was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun outside the solar system. So the question is, was it a Voyager-like probe because it's moving so fast, or maybe just a rock from another star? That was the first one. And then the second one in 2017 was a much bigger object. The first one was 0.5 meter in size. The second one was the size of a football field. It didn't collide with Earth. It would have been catastrophic if it did, because would have killed us all. But it passed near Earth, within a sixth of the Earth-Sun separation. It was observed by a telescope in Hawaii, monitoring near-Earth objects, because we are all afraid of what happened to the dinosaurs, right? We don't want to have the same fate. And they realized this object is moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. And they called it Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. Now, this object at first was thought to be a comet, but there was no cometary tail around it, no gas or dust. And then it exhibited an excess push away from the sun without any rocket effect of acting on it. And moreover, it had a very extreme shape, most likely flat, like a disk, based on the reflection of sunlight. The amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10 every 8 hours as it was tumbling. Very unusual object. So it wasn't clear. It's not an asteroid. It's not a comet. What is it? And I suggested, well, maybe it's space trash, an empty trash bag from another civilization. So that was 2017. And then, oops. And then there was, oops. I'm not sure. Okay. Then there was a comet, which looked just like the comets that we are familiar with in 2019, also came from outside the solar system based on its speed. And my colleagues said, well, this one looks familiar, so doesn't it convince you that the others are also natural? And I said, well, if you go down the street and you see a weird person, and after that you see a normal person, it doesn't make the weird person normal. So Oumuamua was really strange, most likely flat, and it's not clear what it was. I suggested maybe it's a very thin object pushed by sunlight, reflecting sunlight. And in fact, a lot of technological debris that we produce is being pushed by reflecting sunlight. In fact, I'm not sure, but okay. In fact, the space trash that we produce, on January 2nd, 2025, just this year, an amateur astronomer noticed an object passing near Earth, and it was cataloged as a near-Earth asteroid. 17 hours later, it was realized, oh, this object moves exactly the same way as the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX in 2018, Elon Musk. It is a car. It's not an asteroid. They removed it from the catalog. And I actually have a bet with Elon. I am willing to put 1% of my net worth against 1% of his net worth to search, to check if there is any other space entrepreneur who is more accomplished than he is since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. Let's figure it out. It's not a lot of money for him. And then, actually in 2020, there was the same telescope in Hawaii that discovered the Oumuamua, discovered another object that was pushed by reflecting sunlight. And then after a few weeks, the astronomers realized, oh, that's a rocket booster from a 1966 launch by NASA. So we know that some of the objects that are unusual, being pushed by sunlight, are human-made. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? And my point is that the next Copernican revolution, remember, Copernicus realized we are not the physical center of the universe. I actually visited Poland a year ago, a day after visiting the Munich Security Conference, where I spoke as the first astrophysicist that ever, by the way, I saw on the roof of the hotel at the Munich Security Conference, there were snipers with black head covers they were there to protect the politicians. I realized being an astrophysicist is really very fortunate, but nobody wants to kill me. But at any event,
it's overrated.
The next Copernican revolution is that we are not at the technological center of the universe. We have something to learn from a smarter kid on our cosmic block. And I wrote a paper a couple of months ago where I explained that with a space telescope, we can actually go through the million objects, roughly meter in size, within the orbit of the Earth around the Sun that came from outside the solar system, and figure out whether among them, among all the rocks, there is space trash from other civilizations, because over the past billions of years, they predated us and they polluted interstellar space, because we sent out 5 probes, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons. They are heading out of the solar system towards interstellar space. We did it over 50 years. Just think how many more we would produce in the next billion years. And all of that keeps accumulating like plastics in the ocean. All of this trash produced by other civilizations. And we just have to look in our backyard and figure it out. Again, $1 billion will go a long way in this direction. But right now, this subject is outside the mainstream of astronomy. Instead, the highest priority defined by the Decadal Survey is to spend more than $10 billion in the search for microbes, for the molecular fingerprints of microbes in the atmospheres of exoplanets. And frankly, I'm much more excited about finding intelligence than finding microbes, for a simple reason, that we can learn from a higher level of intelligence. One reason I seek intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't often find it here on Earth. And you may ask, where will Voyager be in 1 billion years? It will be on the opposite side of the Milky Way galaxy. So if most stars formed billions of years before the sun, we know that for a fact, they had, I mean, if there were civilizations like us out there, they had plenty of time for their spacecraft to reach us. And we haven't really checked. Until the last decade, we didn't really know about interstellar objects. So I'm saying this is new. Now, the meteor, the object that collided with Earth, was interesting because for a cost of $1.5 million that I received from a donor, we were able to go to the Pacific Ocean and search for materials left over from this interstellar object. It exploded only 20 kilometers above the surface of the ocean, and that implied that it had material strength tougher than all other hundreds of meteors in the NASA catalog. So it was unusual in its material strength, in its speed, and the question was, could it be a Voyager-like meteor? Could it be a Tesla Roadster car-like meteor? Because that car actually will collide with Earth probably in several tens of millions of years. And my colleagues, if there are any astronomers at that time, they might argue it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. So actually, the US Space Command looked back at the data after I reached them through the White House, and they confirmed, yes, this meteor actually came from outside the solar system. The data was reliable, and they also released the light curve of the explosion that indicated how much energy was released and at what altitude was the explosion. And so I decided to lead an expedition to the Pacific Ocean. We went there slightly less than 2 years ago. And what you see here is the deck of the ship that was fittingly called Silver Star. We built a sled with magnets on both sides, and we placed it on the ocean floor, which was 1 mile deep. And we surveyed a region that is 7 miles in size, looking for any molten droplets left over from the explosion, just to figure out, was it a natural rock, or maybe a gadget. And I told my students before I left, if we find a gadget and it has buttons on it, should I press a button? The opinions were split. Half of the class said, please don't do that. He put all of us at risk. And the other half said, please do. We would like to see if it's ChatGPT 100. So we brought back materials, and it was a 2-week expedition. I put all the materials in this black suitcase and shipped it by FedEx to my home, and then brought it to the laboratory of my colleague at Harvard, Stein Jacobson, who is a world-renowned geochemist that has the best instruments in the world. And on the other side of me in this photo is a summer intern, Sophie Bergstrom, who worked with me that summer, and she discovered 850 molten droplets within the materials that we brought back. And I gave her the honorary title, the Squirrel Hunter. And you can see here what these molten droplets looked like. They were very distinct relative to the background sand, and we picked them up with tweezers and published the results. And so there was one type of those molten droplets, about 10% of the entire reservoir, that looked very unusual. They had a composition, a chemical composition, that was very different than solar system materials, up to 1,000 times higher abundance of beryllium, lanthanum, uranium than you find in solar system materials. And so that's a possible indication that we found some material from the original object, but we want to go back and search for bigger pieces with a robot that we will put on the ocean floor. It will cost $6.5 million. We don't have a funder as of yet. If anyone is interested in joining us, let me know. This is an image from the last day of the previous expedition, where I was standing on the ship looking at the sunset. And next to me is an 88-year-old Art Wright, who was a commander of a destroyer during the Vietnam War. And I really liked him because he wouldn't speak much. He would solve problems. And everything he said was true. And there aren't many people like that these days. What you find most often are people that are virtue signaling, that are trying to impress you. That's partly the culture of social media. But this mission was a success thanks to art. And he reminded me of my father. I really liked him. Now, this year, in August 2025, there is a new observatory in Chile that was funded by the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation. It's called the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, and it will survey the southern sky every 4 nights and could find Oumuamua-like objects every few months if they are out there. And now we know to look at them in much greater detail. We can use the Webb telescope to do that. And this telescope will use a camera that is 3.2 gigapixels in resolution, so 1,000 times more than the number of resolution elements you have in your cell phone. So I'm very excited about the coming year or two. We will have new results from the observatories that the Galileo project is building. We will have potentially a new expedition where we can look for bigger pieces of this first interstellar meteor, and the Rubin Observatory might find more Oumuamua-like objects. But if we really want to make fast progress, we need more funds. If I had $100 million or $1 billion, I know exactly what needs to be done, and we can get much better understanding of our cosmic neighborhood. As I said before, the software that we develop would be of great use to the Department of Defense. Thank you.
Followed very quickly by Admiral Gallaudet. He'd like to say a couple words, and we're going to try to make this brief so we can go ahead and
and start getting to some of the questions. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and Representatives Luna and Burlison and Burchett. Appreciate you giving us all an opportunity to share what we want to share and say what we want to say about this important topic of UAP. So I'll be about 5 minutes here, maybe a little less, but today I call on the American scientific enterprise to mainstream UAP research and development. And to do that properly, I should first begin by assessing the current state of UAP research. There are a few brave individuals and organizations conducting such research, including Professor Avi Loeb through the Galileo Project at Harvard, Professor Diana Pasulka at UNCW, Drs. Gary Nolan and Peter Skafish at Soul Foundation with Stanford University, Professor Jeffrey Kripal with the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, and the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. But these are by far the exception. For UAP research and scientific study is shunned by the American science community writ large. Even with dozens of credible former military witnesses coming forward, writ large. Even with dozens of credible former military witnesses coming forward, as well as legislative action from Congress in recent years, the stigma remains too great to jeopardize the reputation, promotion potential, and tenure of those in academia. To better understand this resistance, it might be useful for me to describe the state of climate science in this country, where the complete opposite is occurring. As a former administrator of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration with a PhD in oceanography, I have studied the changes occurring in our Earth system, and while they are indeed significant, and I am by no means a climate denier, climate change is far from the existential threat that the mainstream media and some in the science community claim it to be. A false narrative has been propagated that global warming caused by anthropogenic greenhouse gases is the cause of every severe weather event on any given day. This is mainly the result of a large number of scientific studies that employ extreme and implausible emission scenarios. Lacking the expertise to critically evaluate such studies, the average citizen has readily accepted such misinformation. Conflating every extreme weather event with climate change is imprecise, incomplete, and incorrect. The most glaring examples come around every hurricane season, for which satellite data over the 50 years shows there's been no trend upward or downward of these storms. The same goes for wildfires, where news coverage always links climate change to their occurrence, but wildfires have actually been decreasing in this country. So even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been unable to conclusively detect changes in extreme weather and climate event frequency and intensity. However, saying that we are not in fact in a climate crisis is heresy to the mainstream media and the global science community. This is the situation with UAP, but in reverse. Ample evidence, even congressional testimony, attests to the scientific validity of UAP. But the response by members of the scientific community has been either A, to bury their heads in the sand, or B, to make baseless mockery of the courageous contrarians like Professor Loeb who seek the truth. Why is this so? Well, the reason is partially due to overclassification and a deliberate, decades-long disinformation campaign by the U.S. Department of Defense and intelligence community. Unlike climate change, UAP and the non-human intelligence which control them very well could be an existential threat, as our moderator, Lue Elizondo, eloquently described in his book, aptly named Imminent. The scientific community needs to wake up to the reality of UAP, which represents the most monumental development since the Copernican Revolution. Consider the extraordinary report I received this weekend when a former U.S. Navy SH-60 Seahawk helicopter crew chief who was embarked on the carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in 2021 described to me his reporting on forward-looking infrared video of a metallic sphere at an altitude a few hundred feet above the ship, traveling along a linear trajectory horizontal to the sea surface before it accelerated into the horizon at an incredible speed, disappearing completely. Upon landing, he discussed this with some of the pilots and the other air crew before transferring the FLIR footage to the carrier's intelligence officer. Moreover, this was not an isolated event. For the Eisenhower Strike Group, during that deployment, saw many instances of UAP, primarily F-18s, frequently encountering them at high altitude. And this topic was widely discussed by the Air Wing during the entire deployment. And later, fellow aircrew members of this crew chief from another squadron deployed on board the USS Gerald R. Ford and shared similar experiences. The crew chief also informed me that the secret laptops in their ready room provided access to a shared drive where numerous UAP sightings on FLIR were archived. They stored these videos on a folder named Range Fowlers. You'd like that, Brian. And his commanding officer and safety officer were aware of these incidents, but there was an unspoken understanding not to discuss them openly in the ready room. I have spoken to other sailors still in active duty, and their sightings of UAP have become so numerous that they are desensitized to the phenomenon. My point being that the Navy possesses a trove of video evidence and data regarding UAP, and I see no reason why FLIR footage of UAP and Navy training ranges cannot be declassified and shared with the scientific community. With open access to more data like this, we can transform every institution of higher education by establishing a Galileo project within their astronomy and astrophysics departments, a Soul Foundation within their biomedicine and humanities programs, and an archive of the impossible in their religious studies and philosophy curricula. To close, I point out that last month at the Endless Frontiers Conference in Austin, the President's Science Advisor, Michael Pratsios, committed the Trump administration to creating a golden age in American innovation. I am convinced that UAP research can not only support this, but accelerate it in ways beyond our imagination. The time to destroy the stigma associated with UAP is now. I ask the House Oversight Committee and other members of Congress to demand the DoD, DOE, DHS, and NASA release more UAP data for open science. And I call on the White House to include UAP research in its 2025 R&D priorities memo. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Iowa Campbell. So, we're going to get to our first question here, and it is not scripted, and it is to my former colleague, Dr. Eric Davis. I'm going to be very careful how I ask this specific question. Welcome, Mr. Gold. Good to see you, as always. Dr. Davis, I know your background and I know your work in our former program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. I also know to some degree some of the history and firsthand experience you have on UAP. I believe that this committee and the esteemed members of Congress and the American public would love to hear, to the degree you're able to discuss it, the direct access you had. For those who don't know, Dr. Davis was, and I'll let him answer this, it was submitted into the matter of record for Congress a couple years ago, the Wilson Davis memo. It was alleged that he was the author of it. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up. It has been entered as a matter of public record in the congressional record, and it is extremely significant. This is the man. I won't say he did or he didn't, I'll let him tell you, who authored that potentially. And furthermore, I know has had involvement in the UAP program, specifically from a crash retrieval perspective. Now, I'm going to be mindful here. Dr. Davis, please be careful of security classification, but do you mind sharing, to the degree you're comfortable with, your involvement with information related to crash retrievals and your experience?
Sure. No, good. Thank you. I'm an astrophysicist and also what Mark Mounce at NASA and I call the breakthrough propulsion physicist. We worked at breakthrough propulsion together from 1996 to 2002, and then we continued after that to develop a book that we published with the AIAA Press in 2009, Frontiers of Propulsion Science. So my background is in advanced deep space and interstellar spaceflight, mostly faster light propulsion through the use of general relativity theory and quantum field theory, as well as advanced nuclear propulsion, like nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. And beamed energy propulsion, which I worked on as a principal investigator for the Air Force Research Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. So I've got quite a broad background. And I began my work in UFOs or UAP starting in 1996 when Robert Bigelow hired me to work with him as his director of aerospace physics and astrophysics at the National Institute for Discovery Science. And that was a pretty transformative job for me because as a physical scientist, I'm seeing for the first time eye phenomena. I'm investigating it using forensic science techniques in the field, interviewing witnesses, collecting data. And I have a team of colleagues on the staff that I work with, also PhDs, And we had a world-class science advisory board, which my former boss in Austin, Hal Puthoff, was on the board of directors, was on that science advisory board, and was the last chairman of that board, actually. We also had Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, and for a short time Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmidt, and we had many academicians and former CIA, national intelligence officers, social psychologists, medical doctors, and nuclear engineers, and the list goes on. We had shock belief primarily as well. So it was a really transformative because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I became familiar with Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan and Strong Report Page co-authored a book called UFOs, a Scientific Debate, which was published by the AAAS Press. The AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Science is their prestigious journal that they publish. And so that was a prestigious publication. Every chapter was authored by experts in the field in academia who have studied UFOs and some angle of it from a scientific data standpoint. Data that was collected, data that was analyzed. And so they presented it and published the book. For a bizarre reason, in the 1980s, Carl Sagan had this wonderful astronomy show called Cosmos, and the companion book for that. And what's ironic is that he changed 180 degrees. He all of a sudden went from being UFOs, we have in this book that I co-authored or co-edited with Thornton Page, all of this wonderful data that's been collected that is not explainable due to conventional astronomical, weather, or man-made explanations or events or objects. I'm now calling it pseudoscience. It's fringe science. People were mistaken. Pilots have poor vision. Military pilots especially, and I heard that from Leonard David, who's a aerospace engineering, aviation, space exploration writer, and people like him have said that our military pilots, especially the ones at the USS Nimitz, during its encounter of the Tic Tac UAP back in November of 2004. Oh yes, those pilots have poor vision. They're flying, what, $20 million fighter aircraft? And they have poor vision. How did they get through the Naval Aviation Program and Top Gun School with poor vision?
Dr. Davis, could you elaborate a little bit on your, again, to the degree that you're comfortable?
Oh, I know what you're doing. So it was a transformative issue for me, or a job. It transformed my worldview. It opened up my worldview to a lot more possibilities than what I was used to thinking. As a trained PhD physicist, I earned my doctorate in astrophysics at the University of Arizona in '99. And so I worked on 3 space missions in graduate school, the IRAS, which is the Infrared Astronomical Satellite Program, and the 2 Voyager missions to the outer planets. So as pertaining to the topic that Lou wants me to talk about, I'm not trying to avoid it. It is a sensitive subject. It's due to astronaut Ed Mitchell, Dr. Ed Mitchell, Captain USN retired. Because of him, and I won't go into a long story, but it's because of him that I got on the trail of looking for the so-called legend within the UFO community, the retrieval of crashed or landed UAP craft, or UFO craft as they were known back in those days. And by the way, UAP, the term unidentified aerial phenomenon, goes back to the 1940s even. So I followed this trail, and I ended up, over the course of the following 2.5 decades, working for Bigelow, working for the Air Force Research Lab, working for Hal Puthoff at Urtech International Incorporated, and then working at the Aerospace Corporation. So we're working in a combination of industry and classified programs that we were contracted to do on behalf of for the Defense Intelligence Agency and for the Pentagon agencies that Lou worked at, and the UAP task force that Jay Stratton led at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And so a long story short is that I came into contact with industry leaders, technical scientists, both active duty and later retired, as well as intelligence officers, generals, admirals, colonels, people who directed intelligence or human intelligence collection and analysis directorates at the DIA and the Central Intelligence Agency, who reached out to me to have me do some foreign UAP intelligence analysis and assessment. And so I have been exposed to so much in the classified realm that I can tell you definitively that there is a there. The human race, basically the world's biggest governments, like the United States, our adversary China and Russia, at least as far as I know, have had the occasion to recover craft that have either landed or crashed or both in their territory or even outside of their territories, and have taken those back to the most sensitive of their programs that they've ever had. These programs are even more sensitive and more well hidden than Manhattan Project was, or the modern nuclear weapons industry and the U.S. military and the Department of Energy programs to maintain and upgrade and modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. And so this is one of the most well hidden programs. It is hidden from congressional oversight and always has been. And it was hidden by the action of President Eisenhower, who instituted presidential emergency action directives during his administration. These directives are not shared with Congress. They are classified. And when the Freedom of Information Act was instituted in the 70s, those are not subjected to the Freedom of Information Act request. These directives provide cover for actions that are associated with the retrieval of these vehicles and the scientific and engineering study of them. And that takes place within the industry. What happens is the Department of Defense offices, CIA offices, they create shell companies. They give a sole source contract to the shell company who passes the money to a selected group of defense industry firms. And those firms will take that contract money and turn them around and use that as internal funding. It's called internal research and development funds, which they give to their own people inside their company, their own employees, to do the reverse engineering and analysis and study of these recovered vehicles. And so this avoids all congressional oversight. It avoids the game debate. And it's one of the most clever techniques used to hide it. And as far as I know, only one 4-star general and one 3-star admiral were able to locate these programs. And that's about as much as I can say. They located the programs and they uncovered them. One got a lot of resistance and hostile reception and was told that he found who he was looking for. They were who they were suspected of being. Yes, they were a UFO, UAP, crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. The other one had a lot more political power behind him because of his stature as a 4-star general. And he was able to get into the program and use his authority and his access. I think they call that a super user. The super user has access to all special access programs. So he had his capability to get into that whole thing. I was fortunate to meet Dave Dresch at the behest of Jay Stratton. Dave was a NRO liaison officer to the UAP task force, and Dave was working for his boss at the NRO, which was situated in the second floor skiffs of the Aerospace Corporation building in Colorado Springs. And I was assigned to work at the Aerospace Corporation facility in Huntsville, Alabama, because I was supporting NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Program office. So Jay put Dave and Dave's boss and I together, and I briefed them for 2.5 days, just a week before COVID struck. And Dave took all of my classified and proprietary information of all the investigations I did at Nimitz, AFRO, and working for helping up at ERTEC, and he took that data and ran with it. And what you now know, the aftermath of that was his classified whistleblower complaint to the IG of the IC. And so there is a there. We have had this program going on in various guises, various code names. Code names change roughly every 3 years. They often shift around to the major office and programmatic reorganizations from presidential administration, or maybe every 5 to 10 years in some cases. And so these things are very old. They come in, they've gone, but they're still around. And the amount of money that's been involved, I would say since the beginning in 1944 with the first recovery in Italy, of the U.S. Army's recovery of a craft that crashed in Italy back in 1933. The United States Army invaded Italy and pushed the Third Reich out. They were able to recover that craft and bring it And all of the crash retrievals that have taken place generally on land have gone to right airfield. The majority of the crash retrievals or recoveries of whatever situation it was take place in the maritime environment. And I'm not sure where that is going. I think they're probably also going to were in those days right airfield. I don't know where they're going today though, because I've only worked on the legacy history of this part of it up until about the early 2010s. And ever since the end of the OSAP and the ATIP, I don't know where those operations are going on these days. So I think that's about it.
Is that it?
If there was a question I would always ask, and I'll just say this really easily. Leslie Keene and Ralph Blumenthal asked me this for an interview I gave them in July of 2020 for the New York Times article that they published. They interviewed Lue and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I think Harry was already retired then, wasn't he? Yeah. Okay, so I said basically my interface with the leadership of the industry, which were a number of individuals, is the following. The craft that have been recovered are not of this earth. They're not made by human hands. They are not from this planet. They are not human. They are an alien technology, whatever the word alien means. Are they extraterrestrial? We don't know. We don't know. What motives do they have? Well, we need anthropologists and social psychologists and philosophers to figure that out because they haven't communicated that to us. So physicists like me and Avi, we cannot answer questions like motive. We just need to take data. We call it measurements and signals intelligence in the intelligence industry. And Avi, I support 1,000% because we need him to do what he needs to do. UAPX is another group from the University of Albany in Albany, New York. They're doing that as well. And there are other groups out there building up their own sensor suites to try to scan the sky full-time, 24/7, to look for something that's high, and definitely not weather, definitely not an aircraft, definitely not a kid's little quadcopter.
Well, thank you, Dr. Davis. My recommendation would be at some point here to get to a classified setting like some of the rest of us, and you've already done that before, and have a frank conversation with some of the representatives who I think would be very interested to hear the other part of that conversation, which I'm aware of and been part of. With that said, before we go on, I wanted to thank real quick Rep. Nick Begich for, how do you pronounce your name, sir? I apologize. Begich. Okay, forgive me. Begich. Rep. Nick Begich, who arrived here just not too long ago, so thank you, sir, very much. From Alabama, Rep. from Alabama. Oh, Alaska.
He's like the hub.
Sir, I have an apologies. Obviously, I'm living my dyslexia instead of whoever wrote this book. Thank you, sir, for being here, and also great seeing you yesterday. As far as the next question, what I'd like to do is direct this to Admiral Gallaudet. Sir, only about 50% of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. In fact, some have stipulated that we know even more about the surface of our own moon than the depths of our own oceans. What concrete mapping campaigns, autonomous gliders, deep sea sonars, or cabled observatories would give researchers the best chance of detecting undersea UAP activity? Up to this point, we've been discussing about the stuff we see in our skies and possibly space. But the one thing we've neglected are those observations of UAP that are underwater. And this kind of goes to the whole transmedium characteristic that we're seeing that some of these UAP can display, particularly as a former Navy man and member of NOAA. What advice could you offer there?
Thanks, Lou. That's a great question. And in fact, I would advise us to continue what we started in Trump's first administration. And what we did is we got him to sign a presidential memorandum on mapping the U.S. exclusive economic zone. And that directed the establishment of a strategy, a plan, a national strategy, a plan, and a council, an interagency council, to contribute to the effort. And so we did this in 2020, and in the 5 years since, we've been able to go from having 40% of our EEZ mapped to 50%. And it involves not only using ships and sonar, but also exploring the water column with deep diving remotely operated vehicles, swarms of drones, underwater drones. I used to own 120 in the Navy, and that fleet's grown. And then NOAA has a pretty sizable fleet of underwater and surface drones, and they partner with the private sector that has a vast capability as well. So I'd say we really want to expand the work that's already occurring within the government and the private sector and target it, because most of it is targeted towards ocean science, and that's great. But if we open the aperture a bit and include UAP as a research target, I think we'll learn a lot more about the phenomena as well as the ocean.
Thank you very much. The next question we have is geared towards Dr. Avi Loeb here, and my question for you, sir, is what is your recommendation for the new generation of scientists who want to enter into this field of study but don't know exactly where to begin?
Yes, I actually gave up on the senior members of our community, and I have great hope that the young generation will approach it without any bias, because science is all about evidence and curiosity. And we lose that when we become the adults in the room. So for the young people, in fact, I was asked to establish a Galileo Observatory in a new stem cell campus that will be built in Indiana. And I'm very excited about that because those high school students and fledgling scientists would be unbiased. They would look at the data and try to figure it out. That's the way science should be done. And very often, if you assume something, if you say there is nothing out there and you are not looking, then obviously that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I very much hope that the young generation will approach this subject without any stigma, without any prejudice, without any bias, because it's of great interest to national security. And even if it has nothing to do with what lies outside the solar system, we need to figure it out. Maybe other nations have technologies that we are not aware of. And if we do find something from outside the solar system, it's the biggest discovery ever made in science. It will change our perception and our place in the universe. I had a group of religious people that came and they belong to Christianity Today, an organization, and they asked me, what would be the implications to religion? And I said, well, I have 2 daughters, and when the second one was born, I didn't lose any of my love to the first one. So imagining that God can only attend to one civilization is very limiting. And I think, in fact, it would be enriching to realize that we have siblings. We might be jealous if they're more advanced than we are. Maybe they get more attention. But, that's exciting. We may get inspiration from finding something better than us. So why is it that academia, the mainstream, is shying away from this? Partly because the public cares so much about it. And, there are lots of statements that are not correct that are being made by people who have no evidence, but that should not be a reason to avoid this subject. We should study it, and young people, I think, have the ability to figure it out. If we have the resources allocated to the research, we figure it out. We have the equipment. It's much more exciting than figuring out what dark matter is, whether there are microbes on exoplanets, which probably exist in any warm water environment similar to Earth. I'm willing to bet that there are microbes, but I don't care much about them. I really want to find things that are better than us so that we can get better, we can improve ourselves. And the young generation hopefully will do it for us if we only allocate the resources, if we don't block them, because the gatekeepers, use this technique of not funding such research, ridiculing it. And even when I went on the expedition, people said, oh, he will not find anything. Oh, he went to the wrong place. We don't believe the US government data from the US Space Command. And my suggestion is just to ignore the naysayers because they are boring.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Loeb. I'm going to make this very quick. I know one of the representatives is very short on time. There's a question I'm going to ask in her presence. The question goes to Dr. Davis. We've had discussions at length in certain settings, in formal official settings you have been part of, where we talk about exotic material. I think it might be very helpful to the degree you can. Can you please explain what makes exotic material that has been recovered from the U.S. government exotic? What makes it different from atomically and chemically?
It's actually a very simple answer. It's the way it's fabricated. It's the way it's fabricated. That's what makes it exotic. It's not a new element that's never been discovered and placed on the periodic table of elements. No. The materials are in the periodic tables. They're either radioactive isotopes that we already know of, or they're any of the other non-radioactive, non-actinide elements on the table. It's just the combination of the materials is unusual. It could be that you could say that that's exotic, but it's the composition, it's how you build the craft, the materials that form the craft and everything inside the craft. It's quite exotic because one of the company's leadership was a young material scientist when he graduated with his doctorate in material science from one of the universities in Illinois back in 1970. And he was hired by Ben Rich to work with him and a team at Skunkworks. That was the Advanced Projects Development Agency, I think is what Lockheed Aircraft, I think, called it back in those days. So, so basically, this is what he was telling me. He's an advanced material scientist, and he said, well, we could use the best diagnostic equipment we had back in those days, which was 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we could see the elements through mass spectroscopy that compose these structures. But when we look at how they're composed and structured, it's like nothing we've been able to fabricate on Earth. We've never been able to reproduce it on Earth. And we have no extrapolated engineering or physics technology to tell us or inform us on how we could possibly learn how to fabricate this on Earth. So they understood that it's the combination of the elements was very unusual. It's counterintuitive, but it's the way the materials are fabricated. That's what makes it exotic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Next question is going to go.
If I can go.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Floor is yours.
Yeah, so thank you for you guys coming today. I have to get going, but I am charging Burlison and Burchett to be here and continue on while I am not here. I will say that, I mean, the stuff that you guys have all told us today, mind-blowing. And I think, going on record is even more important. So we are going to invite you back to also testify at some point. But I do have to head up, so thank you so much for your time and your stuff, and we'll be back. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is going to go to Avi Gallaudet. I've got a long list of questions. We're obviously not going to get to them all. We have to try to stay on track. So it's probably going to be my last question for this, and we can go on all day. But we've got two other panels we have to get through, and there's going to be some new information for you. Last question before the break. Admiral Gallaudet, I know that you were privy to the incidents regarding the USS Roosevelt. In fact, there's another distinguished guest we have with us here today, Ryan Graves, who's a pilot, who has been very helpful informing Congress about some of the air safety issues, because he himself has come up close and personal with one of these objects, whatever they are. Could you please provide a brief synopsis on your experience, and more importantly, what was the reaction by certain elements within the Department of Defense and some of your frustration that you experienced regarding that reporting, that type of reporting?
Thanks, Lou. Yes, I'd be glad to. So at the time of the Roosevelt UAP sightings, I was the one-star admiral in charge of all the Navy meteorologists and oceanographers, and I had aerographers mates on the ship doing the weather forecast. And as the chief meteorologist of the Navy, my responsibility was safety of flight, one of my main responsibilities. And at the time, I received an email on the Navy's classified system, secret system. It was addressed to every subordinate under a command called Fleet Forces Command, the 4-star command that I reported to, and that the commander of the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group reported to, as well as several other units. And attached to the email was the Go Fast video that everybody's seen now and has been declassified and released to the public And the email title was Urgent Safety of Flight Issue, and all capital letters. And it came from the operations officer of Fleet Forces Command asking if any of the recipients of the email knew what these were, these UAP, because they were having numerous near mid-air collisions as Ryan Graves saw firsthand, his squadron mates. And then the next day, that email was wiped from my computer and no one talked about it in any subsequent meetings at Fleet Forces Command. And this was very unusual because the primary job of Fleet Forces Command is to prepare Navy units to deploy, like the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group. And that exercise was a critical pre-deployment requirement to get pilots certified to land on the flight deck. And so, not talking about an urgent safety of flight issue, for example, the UAP that split a section of aircraft, you don't want anything to get within a mile of an F-18 when it's operating. So that they didn't talk about it, that was covered up, didn't sit well with me. And that's the reason I have come out today, and or really for the past few years, to talk about this and make sure we support all these reasons to acknowledge and be more transparent about UAP activity and data. And that's why I'm on the advisory board of Ryan's Americans for Safe Aerospace. And we've been advocating for the FAA to institute a system of reporting with standards to get more information out there to support safety flight and science.
Excellent. I'm okay. We have a question by Representative Burlison. Go ahead, sir. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Davis, I wanted to ask before this panel's over, I want to pull some threads here. What is your understanding of the physics or the likely propulsion technology? What is your assessment of what the capabilities are and how it's being achieved? And then also, I want to ask about materials and energy as well.
We can only speculate. These things are so far advanced, we can only speculate. The best speculation I can come up with is general relativity does a great job predicting something like a warp bubble. UAP do exhibit the phenomenon of sublight or less than light speed warp bubbles. However, that becomes a challenge when we talk about UAP that dive into the ocean and climb up out of the from under the ocean and up in the air. So
So it's not warping space-time.
It's a warping space-time. Yeah. That's described on Einstein's general theory of relativity.
Yeah.
And so the problem is
it doesn't gravity warp space-time.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So then these objects are changing space-time around them.
Yeah, they have a thin shell of energy, and the type of energy has to be negative energy density, and it would be consistent with the type of energy density that you can create in quantum vacuum. And examples of that are the Casimir cavity that has a little vacuum region that's bound by the two plates of the cavity. There's also squeeze states of light where that's a laser beam where you're going to take some part of canonical noise fluctuations from out of that part of the beam you're not interested in and pile it up elsewhere in the phase space, and this is getting really technical. So, so I'll just kind of keep it this way. You're going to take the quantum vacuum fluctuations that we know as quantum noise, shot noise, and laser beams. You're going to pile it up somewhere else in an area you're not interested in measuring, and you only want to measure the amplitude of that beam. And at that point, when you take the quantum vacuum fluctuations out of that amplitude, that energy density goes negative. And the energy density is the square of the amplitude. So that goes negative. And that's an example of negative energy. The mass of the Earth creates space-time curvature.
If it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, so that space-time curvature, which we feel is the force of gravity on the surface of the Earth, drags down quantum vacuum fluctuations of the quantum fields that are out in space near the Earth, in the vicinity of the Earth. And that energy density happens to be negative. And so this is an example of theoretically predicted astronomical sources of negative energy as well as laboratory sources of negative energy. So that's what you would need to build a warp bubble. And that's what you would need to build a construct a shell.
Just a brief comment of clarification. We have two pillars of modern physics, quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of gravity, which is curvature of space-time.
Right.
We don't have a reliable theory that combines
That's right.
quantum gravity. So what we are hearing is speculation we do not have the knowledge to figure out if you can create curvature of space-time out of negative energy density because we have never mastered this technology. We don't have an understanding of that. So it's possible that, a millennium from now, we'll have those quantum gravity engineers. That's possible. Currently, we're just like too primitive technologically to figure it out. The question is there something in possession of government that the scientists should look into? And, I would love to have government figure it out because it may guide us about the theory of quantum gravity if we have something.
Yeah, so we have good ideas about these things, and we can speculate on what the best approach to take to build a warp bubble or the show negative energy that would create a terrestrial wormhole, which would be a shortcut through space-time between two distant things. But we have craft in our possession. There are no physicists literally working in those programs. So basically mechanical, aerodynamics, aerospace, thermal control engineers, electronic, electrical engineers, and material scientists. And material science is a part of engineering, usually kind of overlaps chemistry as well. And they've never had a physicist like him or I. They've never had an applied physicist or an experimental physicist. And so they are really lacking in the ability to understand how these things work.
Sir, the legacy program has been very insulated and insular, so unfortunately, it's a bit of a, forgive my approach here, but a bit of an incestuous community. There's not a whole lot of outside involvement because it is so highly classified, and that's been some of the frustration and I think challenges, technologically speaking, because we haven't been able to recently apply new talent, new ideas, new theories to what may be, what the U.S. government may be in possession of.
What about the energy potential?
The energy is a question.
Some of the
Jim,
things we're seeing, right?
yeah, I haven't been able to access that.
Dr. Davis, can you talk for a moment, sorry, about the Nimitz incident, the calculations for the object to go from 80,000 feet within less than a second, 50 feet over the water? What type of energy requirement are you talking about?
Hundreds of times the total electrical energy produced in the United States annually. That's the kind of energy that is representative of the observed features and performances of UAP craft, especially the Tic Tac that the Nimitz encountered in November of 2004. And so it's hundreds and hundreds of times what the United States produces annually in electrical power. And so that compares really well with interstellar spacecraft that would travel relativistic or ultra relativistic being anywhere from 90 to 99% speed of light. The energy is astronomically huge. So these craft, I don't have the security clearances I need to know to get access to the technical details, but I am made to understand that the craft are consistent in size with the Tic Tac, even double in size of the Tic Tac. That would be up to about 100 feet long by 50 feet diameter of that type. Boomerang-shaped craft, arrow-shaped craft, triangular-shaped craft, and so forth. The biggest ones that had been observed, especially that we investigated at Nimitz in 1999, involving Sky Air Force Base. That one was a 600-foot long craft, and it was about roughly 100 feet tall. And so they don't have possession of craft like that. I've never been told that. It's usually the more manned scale.
Something they couldn't do.
Yeah.
So we might know that.
Yeah, so we can only speculate. I know Jim Caskey wrote in his book, I don't remember the title of it, but anyway, it was co-authored with Colin Keller, who I worked with at NID, and George Knapp of KLAS TV in Las Vegas. And so Jim mentioned, and Jim was the program manager for the AAS, the OSAP, the AAS WAP, I think it was. And so basically he described in his book, somebody, I don't know if it was him because he never, I think he said it was him, went inside one of these craft that he had access to, and they couldn't recognize any propulsion or power devices or systems inside the craft. It was completely unusual. Travis Taylor and I have speculated that possibly they're teleporting energy from a remote distant location where the energy is produced and it's teleported to the craft. And that's how the craft can move around without having to carry propellant or rocket engine or an advanced warp drive engine on it. That's one possibility that we speculated
on the material So what you have me thinking is carbon can take multiple forms, right? And are you saying that is the same with other material, other elements? The way in which what we found is different forms of these elements that we have.
It would be different elements, it'd be different combinations of the elements.
And isotopic ratios as well, correct?
So you're going to have a variety of, whatever structural part of this that came off of UAP, and I don't know because I didn't have this, way better knowledge of SAP access, I only have TSSCI. So at the SCI level, I was informed that there'd be combinations of elements from the periodic table, combinations of their isotopes. So you have a variety of elements as they naturally occur, or some isotopes of them mixed together in a certain way, and then they're structurally built in a very unusual way that even today we have no equivalent or analog to. So this is about as much as I was given information at an SCI level.
And do you have, or can you comment on whatever species have been piloting these craft? How are they large? Are they multiple species? Are they like, what was their size, and how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species. People are familiar with the Greys, the Nordics. People are talking about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or an insect type humanoid, because they have this a head and 4 limbs and torso.
So large, small?
Human size, human scale.
And are there how many are accrued?
Well, the Greys I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Corona, which is misnamed the crash at Roswell. It's not the crash at Roswell, it's the crash at Corona in Mexico. Those were Greys, those are 4 foot tall. And the Nordics are typically human size, probably, actually 5, 6 feet tall. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid, they're roughly that height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet or 9 feet tall of that nature.
So, generation. Folks, what we're gonna do here for a time.
I think I stepped down at the wrong time.
We are gonna take a 3-minute break for a change here of the panel. We'll roll right into it. If you need to use the restroom, please do so, but we are going to truncate this break significantly because we've got a lot to cover. And you definitely want to stick around for this next panel as well. Big round of applause for our panelists, please. Some of you folks are plane to catch, so they might have to get out of here quick.
Okay, wow. Eric Davis just told Representative Burlison that 4 foot tall gray aliens crashed at Roswell. Holy moly. I got a lot of process here. Thanks for everybody for joining me. We will try our best to go live again when they pick back up. Until then, stay curious, everybody. I'll see you later.
All Things Unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.